In South Carolina, 7 Republicans and 3 Democrats are in the running to replace Republican Governor Henry McMaster. President Trump recently endorsed Lieutenant Governor Pamela Yvette. But we know from the race in Iowa that while his endorsement is powerful, it doesn't guarantee a win. CBS News correspondent Skyler Henry is live in Atlanta for us today. Skyler, good to see you. So late last week, U.S. Representative for South Carolina Nancy Mace, she said she knew her endorsement was on the line when she voted to release the Epstein files. Does she still have a chance in the race?
Well, based off of recent polling, Mugo, I think that is a great question. I think that, to your point, in the lead up to the question, the endorsement of the president isn't exactly, a golden ticket, so to speak, based off of what we saw in Iowa. But as it relates to the congressman, or congresswoman, I should say, and particularly the calls for those Epstein files to be released, and sort of walking out of lockstep with President Trump and his messaging surrounding that issue, I think that's really where you start to see the fissure, right? And you could take a look at a primary that happened a couple of weeks ago in Kentucky. Thomas Massie, one of the more outspoken members of Congress, who also called for the release of those Epstein files. He was beaten in that primary. And so I think if that sheds any sort of light in terms of what we may see tomorrow, then the Congresswoman may certainly be moving ahead on Tuesday from a deficits perspective. Still, though, she says that she is in this fight. She is still confident that she will win. But to your point, the lieutenant governor, with the endorsement of President Trump, certainly is one of the favorable matchups in that race. Will be interesting to see what happens in that race moving forward, but also what happens in the race for Senate as well. And for that matter, how all of this impacts what we see down the road in 2028 as well.
Yeah, I'm curious, did the president say why he chose to not endorse Nancy Mace, or is that just something he didn't touch on at all?
The latter. Interesting to note that he referred to the Lieutenant Governor Evatt as a fighter and a friend. Some of the election specialists that have been monitoring what's been happening in South Carolina said that, it may shed some light into, I guess, what was perceived as a tight-knit relationship between Nancy Mace and the Trump administration, or the president specifically. It may not be the case given the fact that the president came out late to throw his endorsement behind the lieutenant governor, suggesting that perhaps, leading up until this, that maybe the president wouldn't get involved in this race at all. But in the 11th hour, much like what we saw in Texas, he threw his support behind a candidate that he feels as if has the momentum. And because of that, that very well could be one of those things that gives the lieutenant governor the momentum to move forward to ultimately become the nominee for governor by the end of the day tomorrow.
Yeah, and Skyler, you touched on this earlier. We know this race could play a key role in the early stages of the 2028 presidential election. Can you help us understand why that is?
Yeah, well, let's start with some of the key issues at play here, right? There is always some certain questions surrounding redistricting. That's something that the Republicans in the legislature shot down over the course of the last recent weeks and months, obviously, with many Republican legislatures, especially in the South, calling on perhaps looking into redrawing these state maps. And for Republicans in South Carolina, that would mean attempting to eliminate the lone Democratic seat that is being held by Congressman Jim Clyburn. Well, that was shot down. What is interesting now, though, is what will happen as it relates to the first in the nation primaries. Remember, South Carolina played a big part and big role in terms of what happened in elections past. You think of President Joe Biden getting the endorsement from Jim Clyburn back in the 2020 campaign, and obviously seeing what happened back in 24 as well. And so I think that Democrats are certainly hoping that South Carolina remains top of mind as far as scheduling goes, saying that the state represents sort of where not only the party but where the country is right now in terms of demographics. Republicans argue the same thing. It'll be interesting to see whether that holds any sort of weight, or if we see South Carolina sort of slide down the schedule as we look ahead to 2028.
We'll see what happens. Skyler Henry, as always, thank you so much for joining us.